I got pretty excited when Apple finally announced their new iPad Air series that was more akin to their iPad Pro lineup of iPads, since I had sort of been looking for an upgrade from my really old iPad that I got in, I would think 2017, and it had sort of started giving up and not really holding up to my expectation of what I needed from an iPad, considering, if I wanted to use any drawing apps for things like commissions, everything there would basically be a really big and laggy mess where you couldn't even draw properly anymore in a lot of applications like Procreate. And because of that, I needed a new option. But the issue with it was that the Pro versions of iPads kind of were too much in terms of pricing for what you got. And because of that, when the iPad Air came out, I got really excited because it was a $200 cut on a device that was almost the same in terms of screen size and performance, but the only difference of it really being no Face ID and a worse screen overall. But that screen would still be miles better than the unlaminated screen of my old iPad, so that was still something that I was willing to trade off because the upgrade would still be there. One thing I was really excited about with the new Air was the coloring options of the new Air. So basically, instead of it being the typical space gray and silver coloring, there's now different options for colors. So you can choose green or blue or pink. And I personally chose green because I just really liked the way the mint green looked, and it was kind of different from the typical devices that you would normally see, which are normally just black and silver. And if there is a special color, that special color is usually something that's, I guess, a little bit more popular, like pink and rose gold and in red in a lot of cases when it comes to Apple products. I appreciate high refresh rates in basically anything, but honestly, when it comes to more casual usage of the iPad, you don't necessarily actually miss the 120 Hz. And even when drawing, it's still perfectly fine, and realistically you probably will survive without 120 Hz in the first place, since it's sort of overkill in the first place. And if you have used an iPad Pro, it might be harder to go back into 60 Hz, but if you haven't experienced it in the first place, it feels perfectly smooth enough for anything you could possibly be doing. That relates to some other things that I've seen with other reviews of this device, where it seems like everyone keeps comparing it to the iPad Pro, which makes sense because it looks the same and it's sort of supposed to be a lower tier version of it. But it's important to realize that most people aren't downgrading from an iPad Pro to an iPad Air. So most people who are buying it are probably buying it because they have an older version of an iPad that doesn't really work anymore, and I think it should be compared to that more. Some things I really liked was the responsiveness of the Touch ID as well as the general displays. And I also really like the camera quality of it compared to some of the older models. If you're comparing the iPad Air camera to something that's in the more lower tier models of iPads, it's insane how big the difference is. And honestly, you could probably film with an iPad Air 4 and it would be about the same as something like an iPhone XR in terms of quality from the camera. One issue I did notice was that the camera bump did make sort of an issue with drawing, as well as the general thinness of the device. So if you're drawing without a case on and you sort of have an unbalance in how it's positioned, you basically see the display sort of lose its color or like press in basically, and it's even from very light taps. And obviously this is fixed immediately when you get a case that goes all over the iPad and to make sure that the camera bump isn't raising the iPad anymore. But if you're using it without a case, I would keep that in mind, where if you have a higher chance of sort of accidentally destroying your entire iPad when drawing, even if you don't even press that much when you're actually drawing. Honestly, the iPad itself wouldn't necessarily be that good if it wasn't for iPad OS, because with the way browsers are now loading in as desktop pages and more websites supporting iPad OS, it sort of made everything a lot easier and more computer-like. So if you were buying it for school, for example, especially during an online environment where you need to turn everything in digitally, it's one of the better options than it was in the past. because now you can actually have a more optimized and better working experience compared to loading up mobile browsers, and also generally having issues when it comes to file management and general things like that. Overall, the usability of the iPad Air 4 has been really good, and while obviously there are more specifics I could go into with CPU performance or the amount of RAM it has and things like that, that's not really something that you could even worry about with this device, because as long as you're not doing something insanely demanding, it just works, and you don't necessarily have to think about any of those things. Also, another fun thing, if you are more into the more uniform aesthetic of your entire sort of setup and things you're doing, the green and iPad Air, as well as the green iPhone 12, both of those are about the same shade when it comes to the aluminum. So if you want to sort of mix and match the colors, that would be pretty cool. Also, you can also get the AirPods Max, which in green, which are also the same shade as the iPad Air 4. So if you want to have like a full-on green or pink setup, you can do that. And I really like the way that Apple has decided to sort of have different sorts of colors that aren't different sorts of shades, because in the past there have been issues with the space gray of an iPad being a lot less dark or more dark than the space gray of a, for example, a MacBook or an iPhone. And I'm really glad that they're finally trying to make a more uniform color scheme that you can actually sort of make yours and sort of have a more uniform sort of setup overall. Anyways, thank you for making it this far, and I've sort of been trying to experiment with different kinds of things on this channel, because it's been growing pretty fast. I think I've doubled almost in the amount of subscribers that I've had in just a couple of months, and it's sort of rising and rising every single day. So I'm kind of trying to figure out what fits and what's good for me and what I like to see and what others like to see. So I would really appreciate recommendations of everything. So yeah, thank you.